The wilderness can turn even the most seasoned hunters into prey in an instant. From the Alaskan grizzly that tore through a fortified RV under the cover of night, to a raging bull moose charging across a foggy Karelia River, these 6 encounters push skill, courage, and survival instincts to their absolute limits, revealing how quickly adventure can turn into terror. On September 22, 2025, the mountains near Denali rose like jagged iron against a cold Alaskan sky, and 5 hunters arrived determined to claim bull elk long before winter closed the land in silence. Logan Price, Carter Hayes, Tyler Quinn, Derek Foster, and Jonah Ellis had planned the trip for months, packing the RV with enough gear and pride to survive anything the wild threw at them. At least, that's what they believed as they drove to the secluded lodge tucked near the foothills. The place offered only the basics: a flat gravel pad for the RV, a small shed nearby for extra fuel, and spruce trees crowding the distance so tightly that sunlight seemed careful not to touch the ground for too long. These men lived for moments like this, tested by nature, proud of the strength in their hands and the knowledge gained from years of hunting every season, across every type of terrain. They spent the afternoon organizing their rifles, bows, and gear, making sure tags and licenses match regulations for early season elk, checking radios and maps, confirming everything twice because they understood the stakes of Alaska's wilderness. Logan prepared the cooking station and sliced the meat they brought with them, tossing scraps aside without thinking, the air already pulling a stronger scent into the forest. A chill settled at sunset, and each man crawled into his sleeping space inside the RV or on top of it, believing the thick walls and metal shell separated them from what lurked in the dark. The only one who struggled to sleep was Jonah, who chose the rooftop pod to watch stars flicker between drifting clouds, his mind alert with anticipation of the hunt that would begin at dawn. Hours melted into quiet, the world outside painted black, the forest watching in silence. Around 2 a.m., frost clung to the pine needles, and the only sound was the faint buzzing of the RV generator. Deep among the spruces, a massive grizzly lifted its nose to the wind, the scent of leftover meat drifting like a dare. Hunger moved through its muscles. The bear weighed well over 1,300 pounds, a creature built for dominance, and it stalked forward with slow, confident power, leaving deep impressions in the soil with every step. The forest seemed to lean back as the predator approached the camp that had unknowingly invited it. Jonah felt the first jarring thud beneath him, as if a giant fist had slammed into the RV. He froze, breath caught in his chest, as a second blow twisted metal with a scream of tearing aluminum. Inside the RV, Logan, Carter, Tyler, and Derek shot awake, still lost between dreams and a terror they had never known. Another hit sent the vehicle rocking, cupboards swinging open, supplies crashing to the floor, and the hunters suddenly realized something alive and furious was trying to get inside. Heartbeats pounded in the dark, claws raked the exterior, ripping through layers that once felt strong but now folded like paper under the weight of the grizzly's rage and hunger. The bear smashed its skull against a window, cracking glass into a spider web before its massive paw burst through, sending shards flying across sleeping bags and scattered gear. Derek tried to brace the door from the inside, but the force of the animal shook the frame like a toy, rattling his bones and throwing him backward onto the floor. Furniture splintered under jaws built to break an elk's spine. Clothing tore, hunting packs shredded, rifles clattered helplessly against the walls, and fear took over every instinct the men thought they had mastered. Jonah forced his panic into focus, reaching for the .375 H&H rifle, always kept by his side during trips like this. The metal felt cold, reassuring, and he chambered around while the RV below him sounded like it was being crushed by an avalanche. He aimed toward the darkness where the massive shape shifted, knowing he could not safely hit the target through the RV wall, but also knowing that doing nothing would end with screams and blood. He fired into the air first with a thunderous blast that ripped through the night, hoping to startle the bear. The creature paused for only a heartbeat, then rammed the RV again, driven by desperation and hunger, until Jonah fired again, this time hitting the gravel near its hind legs. The burst of flying rock and the new scent of gunpowder pushed the grizzly into a retreat fueled by instinct rather than fear, and it finally turned away with a frustrated growl that vibrated through the cold ground. The hunters waited in the wreckage, breath shaking, hearts pounding, unable to grasp how a single creature could nearly tear apart a structure they trusted to protect them. Dawn crept slowly into the sky, pink light stretching across Denali's edge, revealing the camp in ruins. Logan stepped outside first once Jonah gave the signal, his boots crunching on shredded cans and torn fabric. The RV looked like a trap that failed to hold something far stronger than human design. A huge section of paneling had been peeled open as if pried by a monster's hand. Food containers lay gutted, the area around the cooking station trampled into mud, claw marks deep and wide carving the metal and dirt, proof of a predator that owned this land completely. They found scratches not only on the RV, but on the shed and even on one of the parked ATVs, as if the grizzly had been testing everything, searching for the easiest path to flesh. None of them spoke because words would have felt empty and weak. Jonah scanned the tree line with his rifle ready, knowing the bear had not gone far, knowing hunger did not vanish with sunrise. Pride flickered among them, shaken but still alive, because they had survived something that could have ended all 5 of their lives in minutes. Their confidence in gear and planning seemed smaller now, replaced by a sharper respect for the dominance of Alaska's most powerful predator. The sun finally rose higher, lighting the wreckage as birds began to call again, unaware of the terror that had tried to claim the camp. Jonah breathed slowly, understanding that the wild gave no warnings and held no mercy. He realized the truth every hunter eventually learned if they were lucky enough to survive a night like this. Out here, the line between hunter and hunted could disappear in a single breath. On October 26, 2024, the remote forests of Karelia greeted the morning with a cold wind sweeping across yellow leaves that clung stubbornly to trembling birch branches, and Finnish hunter Jari Koivisto felt a familiar mix of pride and excitement as he moved through the wet undergrowth with the confidence of a man who had spent many seasons tracking moose through this wild land. He carried his trusted .308 rifle, checked his tags for the October season, and studied fresh tracks that pressed deep into the mud near the swollen river, knowing a heavy bull had passed through only minutes earlier. The recent rains had transformed the river into a churning force, muddy and fast, swirling with fallen branches and icy runoff from higher ground. Yet Jari felt driven by skill and ambition to follow the animal wherever it led. He spotted the bull through the fog, a towering shape near the far bank with a broad chest and antlers like twisted, polished spears that crowned its head with impossible strength. It fed lazily along the water's edge, unaware that a hunter watched from the opposite shore, calculating distance and wind while weighing the shot. The fog stretched across the river like a curtain, swallowing sound and creating the illusion that the world had narrowed to only the cold water and the massive animal on the other side. Jari knew he needed to close the distance to ensure an ethical shot that would drop the bull quickly rather than cause a wounded nightmare in the brush. He stepped into the river, boots sinking against smooth stones hidden beneath the cloudy water. His clothing quickly soaked by the freezing current as it surged against his legs and waist. The cold bit deep into his muscles with each step, turning breath into sharp clouds that drifted away into the fog. Rifle raised high to keep it dry, he pushed forward, trusting every calculated motion despite the slippery ground beneath him. Each splash seemed too loud, yet silence offered no safety either because moose eyes and ears often caught what the forest tried to hide. Halfway across, the bull lifted its head sharply, ears pivoting toward the sound of water breaking. Its body stiffened with sudden alarm as it spotted a human shape where seconds before there had only been drifting mist. The animal snorted, steam bursting into the air, and adrenaline surged through Jari's veins as he realized the calm moment had vanished like smoke. The bull charged along the bank, hooves hammering the earth with deep thuds that echoed above the roar of the river. Its antlers lowered as if preparing to turn the intruder into shattered bone and sinking flesh. Jari tried to steady himself but slipped on rocks so slick they felt oiled, his boots skidding as the river nearly knocked him off his feet, his arms flailing to keep the rifle from plunging into the water. He fired in haste, the recoil almost pushing him backward, and the shot grazed the bull's great shoulder, slicing fur and drawing blood, but doing nothing except turning the animal into a furious storm of muscle and rage. The moose leapt into the river without hesitation, water exploding around its huge legs as it plowed into the current, driven by fear mixed with instinct to destroy the threat. Jari's chest seized with panic as he stumbled, barely catching hold of a hanging branch from a fallen tree buried beneath the water. He pulled himself toward a tiny sandbar, just enough land to avoid drowning, his clothing dripping, fingers numb, lungs burning from the cold air and the intensity of the moment. He scrambled onto the sand as the bull closed the distance, antlers flashing through the fog like the blades of a charging war machine built by nature to crush anything in its path. The animal hit him before he fully regained his footing, its heavy body slamming into his side and driving him onto his back with the weight of something unstoppable, pain tearing through his ribs like fire. Jari clawed at the ground, trying to roll away as hooves crashed down near his head, each impact sending sand and water flying while his body shook from fear and cold. The moose attempted to drive its antlers into him, stabbing into the sand inches from his shoulder, and the smell of its wet hide and the deep animal heat pouring from its body overwhelmed the frozen air like a terrifying reminder that this creature ruled the river and forest. Jari kicked at its legs, desperate to gain any advantage, his boot connecting just enough to make the massive animal shift its balance. He dragged himself toward a pile of driftwood, ribs screaming with each movement, and grabbed the rifle that had fallen beside him in the chaos. His hands fumbled over the stock, numb fingers barely able to grip the weapon, and as the moose reared to strike again, he lifted the barrel toward the broad chest looming above him. The shot thundered across the river and the bull stumbled, its momentum broken just long enough for Hari to roll onto his stomach and crawl through the mud, pushing himself away from the sandbar as fast as his battered limbs allowed. The bull turned in confusion, bleeding heavily now, its strength suddenly fading beneath rising adrenaline and pain. It attempted one final charge, but the river took control, sweeping the animal sideways as its legs buckled. With a violent splash, it collapsed into the deeper current, carried downstream, antlers dragging beneath the surface as the fog swallowed its final movement. Jari collapsed on the cold sand, chest heaving, every nerve buzzing with terror and exhaustion, staring at the gray sky as his breath mixed with the mist around him. The realization hit him like the moose had struck again. European rivers held dangers far beyond drowning or exposure. The wild here did not care about skill, pride, or preparation. One misstep turned the hunter into prey, and survival became nothing more than brutal instinct and desperate luck. On September 5, 2022, the vast cedar forests of British Columbia wrapped themselves around a private luxury hunting lodge like a dark green fortress, where towering trunks blocked moonlight and created a chilling sense of isolation beneath the night sky. While Canadian hunter Julian Carrington felt a powerful pride in being invited to such a high-end experience, knowing that years of skill and dedication had earned him this chance to pursue trophy elk and black bears during the early fall season. He had traveled with 3 companions, Marcus Shaw, Ethan Cole, and Brandon Mercer, all experienced hunters eager to enjoy heated cabins, gourmet meals, and guided ATV routes into dense wilderness, known for holding some of the largest game in the region. The first day brought success as they tracked a bull elk through thick underbrush, its presence revealed by snapped ferns and steaming droppings, and Julian delivered a clean shot that dropped the animal quickly to the forest floor, leaving everyone feeling satisfied and confident in their abilities. They returned to the lodge with spirits running high, adrenaline from the hunt still lingering, and the scent of fresh venison soon drifted around the cabin area as they prepared dinner from the day's harvest. The warmth of a crackling wood stove, soft bedding, and the security of sturdy log walls gave them a sense that the wilderness outside existed for adventure but could not truly reach them here. By night, clouds swallowed the moon, and the forest turned silent with a depth that made every shadow feel like a hidden predator. The hunters, relaxed after a late meal, stored venison and scraps in a small bin near the edge of the cabin, rather than trekking to the proper disposal site farther down the trail. They planned to clean the area in the morning, too tired to focus on safety protocols drilled into them by guides earlier that day. The mistake seemed minor, a simple oversight hidden beneath the thrill of a successful start to the hunt. Around 2:30 a.m., while Julian slept beneath thick blankets, a massive grizzly bear emerged from the tree line beside the cabin, drawn by the alluring scent of meat drifting through the cold air. This bear was a colossal force, driven by instinct and hunger rather than fear or caution, and it moved with the silent confidence of an apex predator that had spent its entire life surviving in these deep woods. Its massive frame shifted between the trees, fur brushing bark as it approached the site of human presence with purpose. The bear found the scraps first, tearing into them with ripping jaws that crushed bones and scattered meat across the dirt. But its hunger only grew with every bite. The smell of cooked venison leaking through the cabin walls ignited a more reckless desire within the animal, and it turned its attention to the structure nearby, breathing hot clouds into the darkness. Without warning, the bear lunged forward and struck the cabin door with devastating strength, splintering wood and rattling every beam as if the entire structure might collapse beneath its weight. The men jolted awake in panic, their hearts racing as they grabbed at boots and scrambled in confusion, realizing that something huge was trying to break into their sanctuary. A second impact shattered the frame in an explosion of wood fragments, and the door flew inward while a huge paw swiped into the cabin, claws catching fabric and furniture as the hunters shouted in fear, struggling to make sense of the violent chaos. The bear forced its massive head and shoulders through the opening, teeth gnashing, eyes wild with aggression and hunger. Marcus, nearest to the entrance, stumbled backward as the bear surged inside and crashed into him with terrifying speed. Claws raked across his torso, tearing through clothing and deep into flesh, warm blood splattering across the cabin floor as he fell beneath the weight of a creature that outweighed any human many times over. Julian and the others felt frozen for a heartbeat, their nightmares becoming real in a single moment as Marcus struggled underneath the bear's primal fury. The bear's jaws clamped onto Marcus's shoulder, teeth crushing muscle and bone with horrifying pressure that forced a choked cry from his throat, his limbs flailing in pure survival instinct while his friends scrambled to reach their weapons. Ethan grabbed a flare from an emergency kit, hands shaking as he cracked it to life, bright red fire hissing through the room and throwing flickering light across the bear's massive shoulders and wet fur. The sudden light and heat made the animal hesitate, muscles tensing as instinct clashed with its desire to continue the attack. Julian fired a warning shot through a cabin window to avoid hitting Marcus, pinned beneath the beast, the bullet slamming into a tree outside and echoing through the night. Brandon thrust another flare toward the bear's face, sparks spitting across its muzzle. The animal roared in rage and confusion, releasing Marcus and stumbling backward as firelight danced against its eyes, instinct telling it that whatever meal waited here was not worth the risk of its own safety. The bear backed out through the splintered doorway, wind from its movement scattering papers and dust as it retreated into the forest, vanishing almost as silently as it had arrived, leaving behind destruction and the iron smell of blood thick in the air. The hunters, breathing hard and trembling, rushed to Marcus's side as he clutched at his torn shirt, his skin shredded by deep, parallel slashes that exposed torn muscle while blood soaked into the floor beneath him. He survived only because his friends had reacted with courage instead of shock. By dawn, the bear was gone, disappearing into the cedar labyrinth where no human could track it safely without support. The cabin stood wrecked, with shattered wood, overturned furniture, and bloody prints marking the path of violence that had erupted in the dead of night. Julian stared at the broken door, adrenaline still pulsing through him, and felt a chilling truth settle into his bones that no amount of luxury or comfort could change the rules of the wilderness. In Grizzly country, hunters walked a fragile line between confidence and vulnerability, and when mistakes invited an apex predator to the doorstep, safety turned to terror in a single crash of bone against wood. On October 17, 2024, Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness stretched in endless ridges and dark valleys, a wild labyrinth of lodgepole pine and jagged rock where experienced hunters like Ethan Caldwell felt both awe and an edge of fear as he plunged miles from marked trails in search of a trophy mule deer. Ethan had spent years learning the habits of these animals, tracking their patterns across seasons and terrain, and today, bundled in layered camouflage with a scoped .30-06 rifle slung across his back, he felt the familiar thrill of the chase. His companions followed at a distance, leaving him space to move silently, confident in his knowledge of the rugged landscape that could swallow a man as easily as it concealed a deer. The morning air was sharp with frost, mist rising from hidden ravines and wrapping the ridges in gauzy white. Ethan climbed carefully, feeling the wet, moss-covered ground give under each boot, yet focused entirely on the large buck he had spotted moving slowly along a distant ridge. Its antlers stretched wide, gleaming dimly in the dappled light, and every instinct in Ethan's trained mind urged patience and stealth. He moved quietly, testing footholds, measuring each step, unaware that beneath the surface the wilderness hid a trap in the form of soft bogs that soaked the ground and swallowed unwary feet without warning. As he crested a ridge, a branch snapped beneath his weight, an instant betrayal of silence. The deer's head jerked up, nostrils flaring, muscles coiling like springs, and before Ethan could react fully, the animal charged, hooves thundering against roots and soil as it closed the distance with astonishing speed. Panic surged as Ethan's boots skidded on mossy stone and his legs sank unexpectedly into a concealed bog, mud rising to his waist, holding him with relentless suction while water and decaying plant matter pulled at his clothing and rifle. The buck, spurred by fright and instinct, struck again and again, its antlers swinging with deadly force, gashing his arm and shoulder with each brutal contact. Ethan twisted and thrashed, mud sucking at his boots, every effort to pull free sapping his strength as adrenaline battled pain and cold. The buck's hooves churned the bog around him, splashing muddy water across his face, and every strike drove shards of bone-deep ache through his body. He could barely raise his rifle to defend himself, hands slippery and trembling, his breath coming in ragged, icy gasps that fogged in the thin air above the ridge. For minutes that felt like hours, he was trapped between terror and instinct, mud and antlers, a hunter undone by an animal he had once considered prey. The forest was silent except for the muffled crash of the buck and the sucking of mud around him. Trees loomed like silent witnesses, their shadows long and accusing. Ethan's mind raced. He could not reach his radio, could not call for help, could barely move his legs enough to shift weight without slipping deeper. Pain and exhaustion began to blur together, leaving him trembling and soaked, bleeding from deep lacerations across his left shoulder and forearm, each one a sharp reminder that even ordinary creatures could become lethal under the right circumstances in the wilderness. Dusk crept along the ridges, turning the mist into a thick gray haze, and Ethan, shivering violently from cold and fear, realized he would not survive much longer without aid. His survival depended entirely on others, his companions who had trusted his pace, and Bruno, the tracking dog trained to follow scent trails even through the most rugged terrain. Bruno had been released earlier to mark tracks and alert the hunters if something went wrong. A lifeline embedded in instinct and training that now became Ethan's only hope. On the second day, the dog's frantic barking cut through the fog and dense trees, echoing off ridges and drawing the hunting party toward the ridge where Ethan had vanished. Each bark, sharp and insistent, carried a weight of urgency that guided the hunters across twisted roots, hidden streams, and slippery slopes. When they finally found him, Ethan lay semi-submerged in the bog, hypothermic, his clothes soaked through, skin pale, lips tinged blue, and arms covered in deep gashes from the animal's antlers. The sight drove adrenaline through his companions as they worked together to haul him from the bog, their muscles straining against mud and exhaustion. Bruno leaping and whining, refusing to leave his human behind. Once on firmer ground, the hunters assessed his injuries, applied makeshift bandages, and wrapped him in thermal blankets salvaged from their packs. Blood had cooled on clothing and skin, forming a thin crust in places, while pain radiated from his shoulder with each shallow breath. The ridge that had seemed endless the day before now appeared to stretch even farther, each slope a reminder that wilderness survival depended as much on fortune as on skill. Ethan's body trembled uncontrollably, not entirely from cold, as the reality of how close he had come to death settled into his mind. A few wrong steps, a hidden bog, and a spooked animal had nearly ended him. By the time they descended toward their campsite, the sun breaking across the horizon, the enormity of the situation became clear. Even a creature considered prey, even one that had been tracked, studied, and understood, could in moments of fear and confusion transform into a force capable of maiming a man and leaving him at the mercy of the elements. Ethan, bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, realized that the wilderness tolerated no pride, no assumptions, no shortcuts. Every step, every choice, every ounce of knowledge mattered because nature did not pause for error, and even ordinary encounters could become life-threatening events that tested the limits of human endurance. On May 13, 2023, Alaska lay wrapped in early spring mist, where low-lying muskeg spread like a watery quilt beneath dense spruce and alder. And Alaskan hunter Noah Briggs moved with the precision of a man who had spent years reading the land, wind, and tracks to anticipate the presence of black bears during the brief but critical spring season. Noah had brought his partner, Samuel Reeve, for a week of guided scouting, binoculars and spotting scopes ready, rifles cleaned and loaded in the knowledge that the land's population of large black bears required patience, focus, and respect. The wind had begun steadying in the afternoon, but as shadows stretched over bogs and marsh, a dense sea fog rolled in from the coast, swallowing the shoreline and silencing the usual cries of gulls, transforming the world into a gray, muffled cage. The pair split to follow separate sets of fresh tracks, each moving with deliberate care through the soggy ground, boots sinking into the muskeg and leaving impressions that vanished into the mist almost as quickly as they were made. Noah's pulse quickened as he crouched behind a small rise, glassing for movement along the fog-shrouded terrain, eyes scanning every ripple in the reeds and clumps of moss for the dark shapes of bears moving low to the ground. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint scent of salt and decay from the shoreline, and every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. He paused when he heard soft, deliberate footsteps that did not match the pace or weight of a man. Heart thumping, he pivoted slowly, keeping low and raising his .300 Winchester Magnum to his shoulder, muscles coiled and ready, as a black shape emerged from the fog just beyond the reach of his vision. It moved low, deliberate, and impossibly silent for its size, dark fur glistening with beads of moisture from the dense fog. Noah's experience told him immediately this was no ordinary encounter. The bear had been shadowing him, following the trail with cautious curiosity, but now it had decided to close the distance. Instinct sharpened and adrenaline slammed through his veins as the bear lunged with terrifying speed, covering the short distance between them in seconds. Noah fired, the rifle's roar cutting through the muffled world, and the round struck broadside. The animal staggered but did not halt, snarling, eyes blazing through the mist as it charged again. Noah barely had time to react as claws slashed into his shoulder, tearing through fabric, flesh, and muscle, sending a shock of pain that stole his breath and left him gasping in shock. He toppled backward into the dense brush, mud and wet moss smearing across his body, the bear pinning him with unrelenting force. Hands trembling, Noah jammed the barrel of his rifle against the bear's chest, bracing himself as he squeezed the trigger again, the kick of the second round reverberating through his shoulders while the bear thrashed with primal fury, snapping jaws dangerously close to his face. The world contracted to a narrow tunnel of pain, weight, and motion, a blur of claws and fur, wet earth and fog, until the bear finally froze for a heartbeat, its snarl cutting through the damp air before it collapsed with a heavy thud. Stunned or mortally wounded, the fog around them suddenly still and silent, as if the land itself had paused to watch the aftermath. Noah lay gasping, blood seeping from deep rips along his shoulder, every muscle trembling from shock and exertion, mud plastered across skin and clothing. His mind spun with the rapid recognition of what had just occurred. Seconds before, he had been entirely at the mercy of an apex predator that moved with speed, strength, and intelligence he had not fully anticipated. Pain sharpened his awareness, reminding him that even a skilled hunter with a powerful rifle could be caught in a life-threatening encounter without warning. Samuel arrived within minutes, guided by the faint shouts and the sound of struggling earth. His own rifle raised as he scanned the fog-shrouded muskeg for any sign of the bear moving again. When he saw Noah lying beneath the dark spray of trees and moss, shoulder torn, jacket shredded and mud covering his face, he felt a surge of relief tempered by the grim recognition of how close the attack had come to ending in disaster. Together, they moved carefully, using every ounce of training to stabilize Noah's shoulder with a makeshift bandage and prepare him for the slow, careful trek back to the ATV staging area, every step measured to avoid triggering further injury or collapse. By the time they reached solid ground and the fog began lifting with the late afternoon sun, the encounter had already cemented itself in Noah's mind as a brutal lesson in respect, caution, and the fragile line between hunter and hunted. The bear's presence, massive and intelligent, had reminded him that wilderness hunting, especially in remote, fog-bound areas, offered no guarantees, and that even routine tracking could erupt into violence in the blink of an eye. Every preparation mattered, but luck and instinct could become just as vital as experience, every heartbeat counting against the raw power of the animal he had faced. Noah's shoulder throbbed with every motion, each step sending reminders of teeth and claws through muscles and bone. And though alive, he carried with him the lasting memory of the fog, the sudden charge, and the realization that Alaska's black bears were as unpredictable as the land itself. Even the most careful hunter could be caught off guard, and even the fog could conceal not just landscape but lethal intent, leaving him with a humbling awareness of nature's strength, speed, and precision. A reminder that in the wilderness, survival is never guaranteed. On March 14, 2025, Norwegian hunter Sindre Johansen moved carefully across the drifting sea ice near Svalbard, his breath forming faint crystals in the cutting Arctic wind as daylight faded into the soft blue haze that marked the end of winter and the start of the long spring hunts. He had traveled north with his guide, Henrik Nygaard, to hunt Arctic foxes whose white pelts blended perfectly with the snow ridges and frozen ocean, using a light .223 Remington rifle for clean, precise shots, while a more powerful rifle rested ready for protection in the unpredictable expanse where predators far larger than foxes reigned without fear. Their footsteps were muffled over the uneven ice, each step taken with caution, because beneath the snow lay shifting cracks and thin patches that could give way with little warning, sending a man straight into the freezing black water below. Sindre loved the harsh beauty of the Arctic, the silence broken only by winds scraping over ice, and the tiny fox tracks that zigzagged across the floes reminded him just how alive this frozen world remained despite its hostile nature. He studied the prints as they wound between jagged pressure ridges, suggesting a fox scouting after scavenging along a polar bear kill site, which explained why Henrik insisted they move slowly and remain alert. The Arctic demanded respect, and even a small distraction could become a deadly mistake. As the hunters advanced toward a stretch of calmer ice, a distant shape formed beyond a fractured ice floe, an enormous figure moving with slow, deliberate steps that carried authority across the frozen sea. A massive male polar bear, thick fur glowing faintly under pale light, had appeared with the silent confidence of an apex predator, drawn by the scent of humans, the possibility of a meal, or simple curiosity about movement in a landscape where nothing should exist beyond seals and polar bears. Sindra's heartbeat quickened as he shifted his weight, the ice groaning beneath him like something alive and unhappy. He knew polar bears often stalked anything unfamiliar, especially hunters who carried meat, fuel, or supplies that smelled enticing after a long winter. The bear's head lifted, nostrils flaring in the wind, dark eyes fixed on the two men who suddenly felt far too exposed. Before Sindra could step back, the ice under his right foot cracked sharply, jagged lines spreading beneath his boots as if the ocean itself wanted to swallow him. He dropped to his stomach instinctively, spreading his weight, but the fractured ice tilted and he slid toward a gap in the floe where black water churned softly below. Cold fear surged through him as he clawed desperately at the ice, trying to anchor himself against the slick surface, fingers numbing instantly as snow scraped away under his gloves. The bear lunged forward, giant paws slamming onto the unstable ice with terrifying force, causing a ripple that made the floe shudder beneath Sindra's body. The animal's sheer size, well over half a ton of muscle, fat, and bone, seemed enough to collapse the entire surface around him, and the thought of being dragged into that frigid water, only to be followed by a predator built for the cold, sent a jolt of raw survival instinct through him. Henrik shouted to get the bear's attention, raising a flare pistol while Sindra tried to crawl toward a snow-covered hummock, a slight thickening of ice that might still hold his weight. His crampons skittered over the shifting floe as pieces cracked away behind him, swallowed immediately by the Black Sea. A flare blasted upward in a screeching arc, lighting the scene briefly in a harsh red glow that twisted the bear's face into something demonic. But the animal kept advancing, undeterred, driven by instinct and hunger. Henrik fired a warning shot with the protection rifle, a heavy .375 H&H that boomed like thunder across the ice fields. But the recoil forced his feet to dig in as another fracture line snaked beneath him. The bullet hit near the bear's forelegs, kicking up shards of frozen ocean. Yet the predator remained focused on Sindra, paws testing the edge of the weakened floe, head lowering as it snarled, vapor curling from its jaws. Every second stretched painfully slow as Sindra clung to the snow hummock, his lungs burning from cold air and fear, the icy surface cutting his gear and chilling his bones. The bear paced along the crack, each step causing sickening shifts in the floe, forcing Sindra to remain perfectly still or risk plunging into the frozen abyss. The hunters existed in a fragile balance, man versus predator, where one wrong breath could tip the scale. Henrik reloaded, firing another flare that hissed as it bounced dangerously close to the bear's paws. This time, shifting wind carried the spreading smoke and unfamiliar scent toward the animal's face. The great bear paused, ears twitching, uncertain whether the floe could support another massive lunge or whether the sudden change in wind meant danger outweighed opportunity. For over 10 agonizing minutes, Sindra remained trapped between cracking ice and a carnivore built for killing, every heartbeat pounding like a drum in his ears as he waited for the outcome he could not control. The bear finally stepped back from the edge, turning its head toward a distant seal hole as if reminded that easier prey existed, and slowly, almost lazily, it retreated across the fractured terrain, until its white body blended seamlessly into the frozen wilderness once more. Sindre dragged himself toward thicker ice with careful, deliberate motions, every limb shaking from adrenaline and cold as Henrik rushed to secure him. The danger faded into the silent wind, but the lesson remained carved deeply into his memory. Even a routine Arctic fox hunt meant to be calm and methodical could transform into a life-or-death battle in the blink of an eye when a polar bear decided the ice belonged only to him. Sindre stood on solid ground again, bruised, scraped, and painfully aware of how thin the line between survival and tragedy could be. The Arctic had allowed him to walk away not because he was stronger, but because the wild ruler of the ice had chosen to let him go.